I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. I'll first start with our industry speaker, Mr. Ian Temple. Mr. Temple leads Cisco's higher education transformation and strategy consulting for Cisco systems. In this capacity, Ian works with higher education leaders to demonstrate how infrastructure and technology can improve the student experience, impacting one-year retention and graduation rates, and increase the relevance of the higher education experience. Prior to his role, Ian was instrumental in the launch and expansion of Cisco's public sector vertical, which he managed operations for Cisco's state governments, local governments, and education businesses, or SLED, across U.S. and Canada. And he also managed global operations for Cisco's global education team. Ian is an engaging public speaker and recognized expert in education and government reform at the state and local level. Prior to joining Cisco, Ian worked at Gartner and founded Gartner's state and local and education vertical in North America, and directed it for 7 years, ultimately building it into Gartner's largest vertical globally. Welcome, Ian Temple.
Thanks, and good morning. Nice to be here.
Great. I would like to introduce our university presenter for today, Paul Marca. Mr. Marca is the Executive Director of the Stanford Center for Professional Development here at Stanford. He is responsible for collaborating with Stanford faculty, industry experts, and corporate partners to develop the curriculum of graduate degrees, graduate and professional certificates, and contract training for one of the largest university continuing education organizations and distance education networks. Paul is a Stanford graduate and has been a member of the senior management team for over 20 years. He has experience as a television producer and director, served on 2 startup advisory boards, consulted with a variety of media-based companies, and helped with the Stanford Advanced Project Management Program, which received the 2005 Best Non-Credit Program Award from the Association of Continuing Higher Education. In 2012, he was elected as a council member of the International Association for Continuing Engineering Education, or the IACEE, and was also selected as the program chair for IACEE's June 2014 World Conference, which will be held here at Stanford. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you, Robert. It's great to be here, and thank all of you for joining us here this morning or this afternoon or this evening. I notice that we have a couple of colleagues from overseas. It's my pleasure to welcome also Ian. When Ian and I chatted recently, and we often have lunch here in the Silicon Valley, where we chat about lots of ideas and opportunities, the goal for us is to try to present some of these what I will call challenges that we have today facing the, I would say, the online education space, both for corporations, for suppliers to that industry, but also, I would say, for universities, where certainly the plot has thickened, if you think about it, over the last 3 years. And what I'm going to try to do is advance the slides, and I'm not sure. Let's just see if I can advance this here. There we go. Okay. So we have a quite bold title here today, Partner or Perish, How to Survive the Online Learning Revolution. Now, that may be overstating the case a little bit, but we hope it's gotten your attention. Actually, I think, and having been in this space for now over 25 years, the online learning opportunities that we see out there are really quite interesting. And I know, Ian, when you and I chatted about this, you certainly have seen quite a bit in the U.S. and actually overseas. Maybe chat a little bit about some of the things that you're seeing out there with this online learning revolution.
Oh, I'm not sure if we've ever had such an exciting or disruptive time, at least in the last 20, 25 years, right? I mean, distance learning or online learning has existed in various forms for a lot of years. You've shared in your bio that you've been doing this at Stanford for many years. But the whole notion of a MOOC or a SPOC or a however, whatever the latest acronym might be, but the notion of being able to do online learning in a very sophisticated form with formative assessments embedded into that, with instead of a 30 or 45-minute video that's really difficult to get through, the notion of something that's 3 to 4 minutes that's easily navigable with tests that are kind of embedded in that whole process. We've reached a level of sophistication regardless of supplier, whether it's a MOOC provider or many universities that are creating these sorts of courses. It's exciting to see the level of sophistication. And I think if somebody's a baseball fan on the line, I think one could say we're in maybe the first or second inning, and it's going to get more exciting or more disruptive, depending on your perspective.
And I think as we talked, and also as I've talked with my colleagues, I note that Dan Sayer's on the line from Wiley. As you say, this early stage in the game, it's really dramatic in terms of the kinds of opportunities that are out there, enabled by the technology and so on. I would also suggest that this notion of partnering is absolutely key these days for a number of different reasons that we'll talk about. As we look at it here, however, here are some of the recent drivers that we've seen, and I've captured a few headlines. I think the common theme here is it's all about partnering. You know, partnering certainly mitigates the risk and so on, but here you see Harvard and MIT put up $60 million into a new platform for free online courses. If you look even at Stanford, my colleagues here and the Vice Provost for Online Learning, John Mitchell, actually will be a participant in the IACEE June conference that we'll be hosting here at Stanford. He, in order to collaborate with an open source platform, drove Stanford to partner with edX to build what we call the Open edX here on Stanford's campus. I know, Ian, you've been in many conversations with Cal State University. Maybe you want to talk to this headline.
I mean, one of the things that Cal State recognizes is that here's the largest university system in America, and they have a supply and demand challenge. How can they fulfill more graduates to help California remain competitive? So they know that MOOCs or some type of new online something is going to be part of that. One could argue that the leader in that so far has been San Jose State, and there have been some experiments that they've done. By the way, some of the press on San Jose State talked about this great start and then this really failed experiment with Udacity. There's a bigger story there that talks about the fact that actually a lot of the numbers were pretty good, but like so often is the case, the correction is never really something that people see in a newspaper. They only see the big initial story. But in fact, they're having great success at transforming and improving the student experience at San Jose State.
Yeah, I think as we look across the nation, certainly the University of Texas is trying to drive and solve really a cost challenge. Many universities, indeed, across the U.S. and across the world face this rising costs of tuition. And I think Texas took a bold step trying to partner, again, with edX to think about ways to do this. I think one headline that we didn't include was the dramatic step that Georgia Tech took with Udacity, another Stanford startup. Sebastian Trun has created this startup with the sole purpose of providing an impact on the cost curve as tuitions rise and education becomes, in essence, a scarce commodity. How can we change that? And so I know you were involved with Sebastian and Georgia Tech.
And that's a great example, another example of partnership, right? Another example of partnership leading to innovation. And in that case, of course, it's a master's level program trying to address a very critical need, not just in Georgia, but across the country, and that is more people getting their master's in computer science. So to do that at roughly half the cost and to do it online, this is pretty disruptive and pretty exciting.
Yeah, I think I captured this last headline for a couple of reasons. First, there are many MOOC providers. Some universities have made choices about those. Certainly, there's Coursera, there's Udacity, of course, that we've mentioned. There's NovoEd, which is another provider. There's 2U. There are lots of opportunities out there. And, oh, by the way, universities who are on the line, did you know that you were actually partnering with other universities as you sit under the potential Coursera banner with the likes of Duke and other universities? You're unwitting partners in this. So I think there's one dimension, the sort of hidden partnerships. The second dimension I would mention is as you think about partnering, certainly universities have the opportunity, and I know you can speak for some of the corporations, but certainly universities have the opportunity to explore and to mitigate risk. And many times universities tend to try to do this by themselves. We have really bright faculty. At Stanford, for example, we have a fantastic computer science department. Why can't we build the app ourselves? And I think that there are a number of different reasons to think about why this is better to hedge your bets. For us at Stanford, I know we've had many meetings with the Board of Trustees driving towards encouraging us to think about ways to expand our capabilities, to think about how to expand the great work that our faculty do. And so all these things start to drive this notion that perhaps rather than try to go it alone, we should think about partnering.
Well, and on that, universities have phenomenal content, right? The research that's being done in many cases is so cutting edge. On the same token, if you look at the fact that companies are in a very competitive environment to win, right? And they're creating all kinds of new intellectual property on a regular basis. Some of that could certainly be shared with a university, could certainly be built into a level of very cutting-edge curriculum. As a matter of fact, we're in the midst, working with a few different universities, of creating a cyber degree, an undergraduate degree program in cybersecurity, which is a very hot topic, and it's something that Cisco is deeply embedded in from a security standpoint. So I think there are multiple opportunities to partner, not just maybe to lower one's risk, but also to increase innovation based on some of the intellectual property that companies like Cisco or Google or Apple or so many others have.
Okay, so along these lines, we were curious about those of you who are joining us today. How many of you have actually partnered to develop a program? You'll notice here we have this polling question. We would love for you to participate and indicate your vote. Have you partnered? It's a simple yes or no question. Please click on the right-hand side of the page here to give us a sense of whether or not you've actually partnered, and that could be in the last years and so on and so forth. So why don't we close the poll and make sure to hit, if you could do me a favor on that, make sure to hit submit if you haven't on the right-hand side, and Tim, our crack technical staff, will make sure to close that poll. And can we share some results with colleagues out there? So here's the results on the right. So it seems as if 38% have collaborated in a partnership. 10% haven't, and most of the people didn't actually answer. So we have another polling question coming up. So here's the challenge. Make sure to hit submit. So the next slide, if indeed you have actually we have this, how would you evaluate, if you partnered, how would you evaluate the results of your partnerships? Again, try to make selective, the selections are not productive, fair, good, very good, or E, off the charts, great. So please select your answer and hit the submit button down below so that you have a good sense of that. We can share the results in just a moment. Again, remember to hit submit. We have a few folks who didn't do that the last time. So maybe, Tim, if you could close the polls for us. See what we've got here.
And by the way, I would say that we're at least D or E in terms of Cisco and SCPD partnering. We've got to be at least at the very good or off the charts great.
That's right. So just to disclose my answer, I marked very good. We'll talk about some of the things that we have selected. We have, okay, so the results here are posted on the right-hand side. Looks like a lot of people think very good. There are some folks who are not productive, fair, and good. If I total that, actually we have about 24% from good to not productive on the negative side of the scale, I would say. Very good, and then off the charts grade. We have 7% off the charts grade, so that's an important result. So let's move on. What we'd like to do now is maybe talk a little bit about why we believe it's really so important to partner in this particular time. And then we'll talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we see specifically to universities. I know many of you there are on the line are with universities. And then talk about the maybe 6 fundamental partnership models. So that's where we're gonna head here. So I've got this slide up. Ian and I will bounce back and forth. Why the need to partner now? Why is it so important? I think as we think about it from a university perspective, it is an incredibly and rapidly evolving space, online learning. Even though many of us, and I know that Linda Crute is on the line, many of us have been doing online education for a number of years. It is absolutely clear now the white-hot spotlight is on this space.
Yes.
I can't remember in my first 24 years how many times I actually met with the Board of Trustees at Stanford. But in the last couple of years, it's been much more frequent. So the attention paid to this space is dramatic. I know, Ian, you've seen a lot as you have run across the United States chatting with other universities.
You betcha. I think the biggest question which is fueling this, Paul, is this notion of relevancy. So if you look at the residential students that are 18 to 22 years old, regardless of what university that they're enrolled in, they've been raised on the Internet. The Internet's 25 years old. So if you look at forces that we see causing great change, both in higher ed but in industry, it's mobility, the fact that people want to consume content on any device at any time, anywhere. Cloud is creating lots of innovation and new choices, and video. The amount of video consumption that's being viewed on the Internet and being used in a variety of learning contexts is tremendous. And so the question in my mind for the universities that I work with is, if those are 3 inexorable forces, right, video and mobility and cloud, and you've got a generation of residential students that's been raised on the Internet, is there alignment with the experience that they're getting at their respective university? Sometimes yes, sometimes no.
I would say in our job in providing education to industry, I've had a number of conversations with companies recently, and they too are really interested in this evolving space. Yep. There actually is a fairly low level of maturity in the companies that we've engaged. And the conversation, I can think of 3 that I've had in the last 4 months, goes something like this. We're interested in online learning. We've done everything face-to-face. We have no platform or very rudimentary platforms to deliver online learning. Stanford, can you help us get in the game with some experiments or pilots to do this? So it's not just universities who maybe have been active in this space, but it's also companies that are trying to capitalize and partner with universities to make progress in this space.
That's a great point. That's a great point. And the other challenge too is, depending on how long and how long a company's been in business and how big they are, they may have a multi-generational workforce. So they also need to find ways to be innovative across a broad spectrum of employees. And online learning has to be part of that.
I think the next bullet, the perceived need for making progress, is one that I believe needs to be recognized, particularly in universities. I mentioned the Board of Trustees, but also we have at Stanford now, for the first time in 25 years, created a Vice Provost for Online Learning Office.
That's the big move. Yep.
And there are very few. Stanford does this with much care, and I believe that other universities are seeing this level of scrutiny. And when you dedicate that level of resource and attention to any effort, there is the hope that progress will be made, perhaps even more rapidly than in times past. I don't know what you're seeing in the marketplace, Ian, as you chat with universities.
Well, so you have Dr. Mitchell doing, leading the online effort here as Vice Provost for Online Learning. There's the Center for Teaching and Learning at University of Texas. Dr. Harrison Keller runs that operation, and that's all about how can they innovate from an online learning standpoint. You've got what Udacity and others are doing. You look at what Daphne and Andrew have created in Coursera. I mean, this is continuing to take on tremendous speed. And so I look at perceived need for progress. I think the perception, that first word, perceived, may be going away, right? More and more people are waking up that there is a need for progress.
Yeah, I think as you also think about some of the market drivers, we talked a little bit about the cost curve and trying to address this, and how can universities leverage these new tools and techniques to make progress against that dimension. It's really important.
And I think that's a particularly vexing challenge for public universities, right? And public universities in America educate roughly 75% of the degree holders, and yet they are so challenged by cost. The basic mission for so many public universities is to provide access to as many people as possible within the geography they serve. If they optimize that mission of access, then their costs go through the roof. They can't build new buildings. They can't hire more faculty, right? So then what happens to quality? The quality implodes. In a sense, you could say they're stuck in an iron triangle. And one way to get out of that iron triangle is to invest in different types of online learning approaches so that they can affect scale. They can scale with quality if they're doing this thoughtfully, if they're doing this artfully, and some are. The answers exist. The question is what is best for for the respective university. But the notion of scaling with quality and using online learning to help address the supply and demand and cost issue, there are choices, but moving at a glacial pace is something that probably is no longer acceptable. Just one person's opinion.
Well, I think you make a great point with regard to speed to market. I think in times past, without this focus and the really alignment of the technology trends, speed to market was actually challenging. We actually had to, many universities, Stanford included, had to build it themselves, build facilities, capture facilities, build server rooms, hire staff to support the effort. Now, while that is not going away, I think for some new entrants, some new universities, including some of these state universities, they can look at the options to supply education more rapidly by engaging in partnering with Udacity, Coursera, NovoEd, others, where there previously haven't been resources that you could dial up. In addition, I would say Cisco, providing our WebEx platform here today, is another enabling company, and there are many out there. Talk a little bit about what you see in terms of speed to market for these perhaps late entrants in the game.
Well, there's always that leapfrog effect, right? The benefit of being last is that maybe you can be more innovative and you can leapfrog and get ahead of what others have done. You can also learn from others' experiences. San Jose State, when they launched this whole effort with Cisco and others to change the student experience with Udacity, with edX, they said this was an experiment. It was very public. President Kiyomi was very public about the fact that we're trying something new and it's an experiment. And, they've learned a great deal in the process. We've learned a great deal working with them in the process. And so to the degree other universities are willing to take those learnings and apply those, that can absolutely help their speed to market. As a matter of fact, we have lots of people that are, lots of universities, as they come and visit Silicon Valley, they're visiting San Jose State to learn, the good, the bad, the challenging, to learn from those experiences and then apply them. So learning from others absolutely has a major impact on speed to market, and the fact that there are choices of whom you can partner with, right? 5 years ago, 7 years ago, there was no such thing as Udacity. There was no such thing as Coursera. There was no such thing as edX. You were really kind of on your own, unless maybe you worked closely with SCPD, since you guys have been doing this for many years. But there were so few choices. And now there are many choices, and those will, in the last 18 months, $600 million of VC funding has gone to ed tech. I'm guessing that's not the end of VCs wanting to invest in ed tech.
As you think about that, one of the things that we see about partnering, even with our own Vice Provost for Online Learning office here on Stanford's campus, the inside the university partnership, if you will, is the challenge and opportunity to build new skills and core competencies. One of the things that I see, and I've shared this with a number of folks who are on the line here today, is the requirement, rather than thinking about the technology, which can be supported by many platforms and in a variety of different ways, university organizations like ours need to be thinking about how to develop what I call Sherpa skills. The notion that we have got more instructional design demand, that is a hot title around here in the Bay Area, certainly with the universities, Berkeley included, San Jose State, Stanford, Santa Clara, and so on. And helping faculty think about not only the content that they're hoping to deliver in a new way, but also think about that, as you mentioned earlier, Ian, that digital learner, that new student who's coming on Stanford's campus or North Carolina State's campus. I see they're represented here in the roles. Hi, Linda. How's it going? The notion that this new learner has been online for their entire lives. They don't, when they try to turn on, these youngsters try to turn on a Samsung TV, they don't press the on button, they swipe the screen. So this notion that these new learners are coming up to speed, and that we as university organizations need to create this Sherpa-like environment to help faculty succeed in this new market.
Well, you know, I was at an event a few weeks back talking about online learning, and a number of the faculty talked about the fact that, hey, you graduate with your PhD, you've done great research. Did they ever really get amazing training to teach them how to be a great teacher, a great instructor? And oh, by the way, now for whatever it is that you've done for many years, now you've got to be a great online instructor, and you have to repurpose your curriculum and your content, and you've got to tilt this on its axes, and you need to do it differently. These are new skills and new competencies. And I think over the years, there has been a lot of investment in technology in K through 20 education. We haven't had a commensurate level of investment in professional development for the faculty. I think that's a critical need.
And that's where we see this instructional design title being extremely popular. At Stanford, we've hired perhaps 20 across the university in various schools. We have 7 schools here, and there are probably more to come. I think one of the other things that we see in trying to partner is actually this bullet that I have here, challenge existing modes of operation. For so long, we have been doing things the same way, and we've been able to achieve success. And I think even those of us who have been successful need to consider ways to challenge the things that we're doing, to maybe even, and I'll be bold here, sow the seeds of our own destruction. What I mean by that is, you know, I've been challenged here at Stanford to think about, we have a delivery platform, it's custom built, and our Vice Provost for Online Learning has created Open edX. What if we could begin to partner there to extend our content with that platform to see how it goes? That may or may not work. We don't know. We think that everything seems to point to success, but we need to experiment there. We need to challenge even our own existing modes of operation.
Yep. Well, I saw a headline this morning that said universities need to start redefining their definition of success, right? What is success? If you talk to recruiters at Cisco, if you talk to recruiters at other companies, they would tell you that having a shovel-ready, independent worker that can see their way through different obstacles and get to an outcome, that's a challenge. So how do we find ways to be, you know, to challenge our existing modes of operation? I think in education, because of the fact that this is a segment of industry that fundamentally exists to study a problem, to do research, to examine a particular issue and really get to new findings, to then launch into an execution mode so that you can actually change that institution and how it delivers something, that's a challenge. And part of what I do, part of what Cisco does is we're a resource to help with that execution, right? Okay, great. We've studied it. Now, how do we challenge our existing mode of operation and move to a new sort of execution model? And that's something that I spend a great deal of time on, because that's not, I don't think that's innate to a lot of people, not just in education, but I think human beings like to study the problem, because if you study the problem and then you move, there's a risk. So we help lower people's risks. That's another way of looking at it.
Yeah, and I think as we consider the last bullet on the page here, innovation, clearly the notion of innovation in universities, I think there's a question here where universities tends not to be the most apt in looking at new technologies and keeping up with new technologies. One of the best ways to at least understand what's happening in the market landscape vis-a-vis technology and is actually to reach out, to have an active plan to partner with key stakeholders, organizations in your ecosystem, and also other universities to learn what's going on. This is why I'm so excited to be hosting the IACEE conference June 24 to 27. We hope to have 200 to 250 colleagues sharing some of these ideas, how they're using tools and techniques, what partnership models work. And by the way, I would suggest to you all, if you have questions or challenging concepts or new ideas that we're missing here in this, please send them in. There will be an active Q&A session toward the end here. We don't have by any stretch all the answers, but want to encourage you to continue the dialogue online. But Ian, thinking about innovation, what are you seeing? How is Cisco engaging to help foster innovation at universities?
It's, so whether it be curriculum design, where we're partnering with a university to design new curriculum, like on cybersecurity, like I mentioned earlier, there's a level of currency, and I don't mean monetary, there's a level of currency of that content that we can bring to a university that they otherwise would probably not be able to access. So there's certainly that. One of the things that we see in our business is we're seeing how video is transforming the internet. We see how video is transforming education internally. We're seeing and living these forces, and some of these forces, to use a word I used earlier, is inexorable. We can't stop them, right? Whether it be cloud, whether it be mobility, whether it be the use of video, this is going to continue to move. So how do we adapt to that? How do we harness those changes or those powers to our benefit to be more innovative? Because if they're not going to stop, I oftentimes talk about the difference between a revolution and a parade. A parade is if you take the flag and you run to the front of a crowd of people. Then it's a parade, no longer a revolution. So how can our university customers grab that flag and run to the front? Because you don't want to be part of a revolution, right? And there's lots of things in the press nowadays of revolutions, and they're generally not pretty.
I would say the other opportunity that we as universities, and I represent the university colleagues on the line, one of the things that we need to think about innovation is what dimension would where would we like to innovate on, and on what dimension? So there's certainly technology innovation. Perhaps our processes are old. We need to then step up to the plate and try something new, if for no other reason to challenge the existing norms and modes of operation. The second opportunity that we see in innovation is innovating on behalf of the customer. Perhaps it's a new business model, an opportunity to partner with another university to extend content in a geography and with a different business model that may not be palatable in the local market. So certainly thinking about business model innovation is another. And I would say that it's important also for us to innovate in our own teams, this concept of building new staff lines that perhaps we didn't have on our roles to help support the new approaches that we might leverage with our technology partners. So it's with this we hope we built some rationale. Why do you need to partner? I think on this this next slide, as with any relationship, a partnership is a dance. With the right partner, you can all win, but with the wrong partner, you're stepping on feet. So now, how do you think about how to develop a good partnership? And what I'd like to do is offer a model that we have been thinking about here at Stanford. And I know that universities would certainly appreciate. I have a couple of images here in gears. Now, for those of you who are at universities, it can be like a well-oiled machine if you understand and have alignment. But if you are not aligned with your group's strategy, your university's strategy, you may get caught in some of those gears, and it can be painful. One of the things we want to, starting at the top, understand your strategy, both of your university, certainly your organization and the alignment that you have there, and also as you think about partners, aligning the goal as the partner. Now, Ian, as you think about the things that you have done, what are the elements that you have had to leverage in order to build successful partnerships with universities from the corporate perspective?
Well, you used a word earlier, alignment. And I would say alignment is very key. And, you know, it's interesting. One of the first things that sometimes we will get asked when we're dealing with leadership in a given university is, you know, Cisco has something called a Cisco Foundation, and Cisco has this networking academy program that's existed for 17 years. If we're interfacing at an executive level in a lot of universities, it's relatively common where somebody will say, hey, well, will Cisco make a donation to the university? And our view on that is, okay, if we make a donation, we have a one-time sort of spot impact. But if they're making an investment in infrastructure, if they're making an investment in innovation, if they're making an investment in technology that changes process, if they're making an investment that's improving the student experience, that's a much more longer-lasting, impactful sort of relationship. But it's important that there's, you know, open communication and that we have strong alignment with leadership, and we can speak to impact, right? So there's a lot of time and energy that goes into vision, strategy, the executables, how you measure the success of that. That's a big part of our dialogue, which is all about how do we create alignment. And then, you know, I know that later on today we're going to be talking about some elements of a strong partnership. And it's important to also look at some of those nuts and bolts. But alignment and open communication is a very key part of this, Paul.
For universities, certainly we have to understand, like you do, what's going on at the highest levels. What is the vision, the mission, and the goals and objectives? One of the things that we get, a gear that often trips up those of us who are administrators, is ensuring that we have faculty commitment. And so clearly this is an important gear. I also would highlight this notion of institutional commitment. Having and making sure that, particularly in this day and age where there are lots of checks and balances, shall we say, really important to have, at Stanford, for example, the Office of General Counsel making sure to check on these elements.
And by the way, we're deeply involved, I'm deeply involved, our team is deeply involved in faculty and institutional commitment, right? Because 95% of people talk about change and 5%, you know, I think actually do it. And change, if you don't have faculty involvement and institutional commitment, that becomes very painful. And it kind of goes back to alignment.
So one of the things that I'll reflect that perhaps is unique to Stanford and the other universities is we actually sometimes in this gears we need a little bit of ability to grease the gears or oil the gears, and we certainly work with alumni very closely to help identify opportunities both locally and internationally to help then encourage us perhaps as an external voice about what we might do. We also, when we consider partnerships, we look at potential partners outside the university. This is, I think, a particularly an area where I've worked and spent a lot of time. How do you actually develop and build partners to make sure that as you might. From the university perspective, Cisco is very interested in partnering. I have to make sure that our strategy, our university strategy and our organizational strategy aligns with yours so we have a good fit. So I think it's incumbent that you, as you seek partners, you align those. And the other thing that I would say quickly is looking at whether or not you have the capacity to do this.
Yep.
We dedicate program managers for each partnership, strategic partnership that we have. And then finally, expect to be revising that strategy. So it's not just a one-time game, you put it on the shelf. Strategy will lead us to victory. Rather, it's an iterative process, particularly with partners. You have to be considering this in the game plan.
Good point.
We want to talk in brief about the 6 fundamentals of a strong partnership that Ian and I, as we prepared this talk, we thought about. And certainly honesty is at the cornerstone.
Honesty and open communication. Again, I don't want to overuse the word alignment, but if there's honesty and open communications, chances are you will get to a greater degree of alignment, right?
Certainly, clear expectations are something, again, at the outset. If you have a clear strategy, goals, and missions, and we can have honesty and open communication throughout the process, this is going to be a win-win, as we have seen. We also, I think, talk about what's the disaster plan. I think assuming that that things are going to go well is really important. Everybody should have a positive outlook as you go into a partnership, and it's incumbent on us as leaders to think about what the disaster plan looks like as well.
Absolutely. And I would almost liken that to any sort of contract or agreement, right? In essence, that's the governing document for the partnership or the relationship, whatever it might be, right? Whether it be buying a new car or maybe it's a new house, right? If something goes wrong, the contract helps govern what the remedy is for both parties. And that's what I think of when I think of disaster plan. It's like, okay, well, how do we get out of the disaster? But then what's the agreement? How does the agreement scope how we get out of that disaster? But let's talk about these things in advance. Let's plan for failure. God forbid it happens, but if it does, then we've got a plan to get through it.
Along these lines, one of the things that we have done is crafted a partnership with our Office of General Counsel. These folks, whereas sometimes they can be viewed as inhibitors, actually we view them as enabling success now and in the future. So this is an important point. We talked about open communication, critical.
Yep.
Say a few words about fix, don't blame in your view.
So the best description I have is, you know, one of the universities that I work closely with, the president talked about the fact that when you install technology, this can be complicated. It can be challenging. And so, you know what, Cisco, we're a big company. We, you know, building an enterprise network that's sophisticated, that can manage big demands, especially with the use of video on corporate networks nowadays. If you're doing a large deployment, chances are you might hit a speed bump. Well, if you hit a speed bump, how do you get through that? You need to really focus on, we got to fix this. Let's get through it. Let's make sure that it's working. And blame is not really an issue, especially if you have a good agreement in place that describes how you remedy a challenging situation. And if the emphasis is on fixing it and not blame, and both parties agree on that, then chances are you can get through that speed bump. You can get through that obstacle or challenge with alacrity.
Those are great points. I think the final item of the 6 fundamentals for a strong partnership is plan and revise regularly. Build into your plan that revision of maybe not strategy every week, but certainly there are tactics and elements that if you have open communication, which will need to be revised. We have in many of our partnerships our most successful weekly meetings with our partners where most of the stakeholders are on the phone call for the express reason to make sure that we have alignment at the various levels, senior leadership champion, program management, and program staff and coordination.
That's
so,
great.
So these are some things that we have shared. And now I want to turn it back over to Robert Katayama, who will talk a little bit about our conference, the World Conference here at Stanford in June.
Great. Thank you, Ian and Paul. Please continue to submit your questions to the presenters. We will be addressing your questions in a couple of minutes. While we gather these questions, I'd like to briefly share some information about the IACEE and their 2014 World Conference hosted here at Stanford University. We hope that today's discussion has provided you with valuable information and insight on a successful education partnership. As higher education expands and moves in new ways of teaching and creating content, we like to share these ideas and stories with our greater community. We invite you to join us at the 2014 World Conference, again here, June 24th to 27th on Stanford's campus. Our keynote speakers will be John Hennessy, President of Stanford University, talking on the global workforce of tomorrow, Daphne Kohler, the co-founder of Coursera, on innovation in education, and Leonard Lane, Managing Director at the Fung Academy for Lee & Fung Limited, a global supply chain company, on university and industry collaboration. I also like to take a minute to talk about the pre-conference workshops on Tuesday, June 24th. You may be interested in our first featured workshop, Innovations in Continuing Engineering Education. How do you, as an education provider, encourage, foster, and sustain innovative products and services to keep up with these challenges? Learn from an expert panel from around the world and work with them on a hands-on innovation project with your colleagues. We ask that you don't miss this opportunity to get engaged. Our second featured workshop is e-marketing through social media and online tools. Learn the latest trends in e-marketing, social media marketing, and the online tools to support it. This panel will draw from real-world examples. The panels will share their knowledge and experiences, discuss numerous tricks of the trade, and help you navigate your way through the various social media tools to determine which will help you achieve your organizational goals. You can also earn a badge for participating in this workshop towards the IACEE Manager Training Certification Program. The IACEE is launching the Manager Training Program that allows interested individuals to become certified by this internationally recognized organization. It is designed specifically to address the training needs of CEE managers and leverage the experience and knowledge of industry leaders from around the world. As you can see, the program content areas are marketing strategy, demand analysis, managing the brand, learning and delivering technology applications, and international and global competition. The program features face-to-face workshop sessions, like at the World Conference, virtual training sessions, follow-up assignments to apply the tools and techniques at your organizations, and the opportunity to get assignment evaluation and feedback from our expert panel. So, I'd like to ask you a question. What is your level of interest in the IACEE 2014 World Conference? I'm interested in attending the conference. You're interested in attending the Innovation in Continuing Engineering Education workshop. You're interested in e-marketing and earning a badge towards the CEE Manager Training Program. Or you're not sure and would like more information. You can also let us know if you're not ready. Please submit your answer by clicking on the corresponding answer on the console on the right. Great. We're now closing the polls. Thank you very much for letting us know your interest in the World Conference. I'd now like to turn it back over to Ian and Paul for the question and answer portion of this webinar.
So in order to maintain the right time and to respect your time, we're going to answer just a couple of questions. So the first question is, keeping up with technology is often a challenge for universities given the lengthy administrative process. How can industry help universities keep up? Ian?
Well, I tell you, 10% of our global traffic in our briefing centers around the world is from higher ed. So, I mean, that is a big component of what we do. And in those sessions, we're talking about where technology is heading, not just Cisco, but, other technologies. I mean, that's generally a very rich exchange. And we have these briefing centers all over the world, but we're also doing these via WebEx or via telepresence. So we do a lot of customer education, and that's one form. And there's a very high satisfaction rate because there's a pretty rich exchange, and they're getting access to our executives or some of our lead engineers. In many cases, it's under non-disclosure, where we're really showing some of the new things that are happening. So that's one way that we would partner with our customers.
Certainly, again, I believe that I go to as many conferences as my time will allow, the goal of which, as I go to these, is to find out what people are doing and what technologies they're using. Yeah. And while we may not make a decision based on that, it's certainly good to get an idea of the landscape. And I would say one challenge for university administrators is, how do you get out there and survey the landscape of technology and also potential partners where you might be able to utilize that technology? We have a second question here. Do you consider the lack of regulation over MOOC content and evaluation methods to be an issue when considering quality of MOOC courses? While we didn't address MOOCs or massively open online courses specifically, I think it is of concern, both the validation process, and there's some technologies that are being employed to validate that you are who you say you are with typing recognition, facial recognition, and so on. I think when we consider building MOOCs, we certainly are working with our faculty here at Stanford, who by and large have very high quality content. And the fact that we're not giving out credentials makes it less important to some regard to make sure that testing and evaluation is really rigorous. It is for the benefit of society, for the globe, if you will. And I think that that's how we consider it. I don't know, Ian, if you have additional thoughts on that.
Well, so I would share the same concerns. If I may, to be a little bold, from an employment standpoint, from an industry standpoint, more and more we're looking at competency. So I do think there's been a shift, and that is, if you can prove competency, I know there are VPs at Cisco that want to hire somebody regardless of what their degree is and regardless of where they went to college. Because at the end of the day, it's results and it's getting the job done. And so I know that's also kind of why Udacity is starting to partner with corporations and individuals. If an individual can have a rich set of capabilities that are supported or facilitated by some of that curriculum at Udacity, and then can prove to an employer that they have that competency, then one could argue it doesn't matter what the quality of the MOOC is, as long as the outcome is something that an employer is happy with.
So as you're talking, and as we wrap up in our last minute, you realize you've created the impetus for disrupting universities. Could Udacity make all our universities go away? I don't know, but perhaps this is a good place to leave it as we consider having you come to Stanford in a couple of months to talk about some of these deeper issues.
Unless this is the last time I'll be asked because I've been so disruptive.
Ian, I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you all for joining us here this morning. We hope we can continue the conversation online and certainly here at Stanford University, where, by the way, Ian and I will be on a panel on the last day. With that, I want to leave it, and I wish you, wherever you are, a good day.